On this episode of Carnage, we're getting back into our V8 Lexcen build. For those of you just joining us, this is a Toyota Lexcen wagon that looks a hell of a lot like a VR Commodore wagon. But it has Toyota badges and Toyota on the compliance plate, so it's a Toyota. And so we're going to put a Toyota V8 into it, namely a 1UZ, right? So 4-litre quad cam V8. We're going to put it in here with a turbo and yeah, have a lot of fun with it. It should be pretty cool. Of course, this is kind of the forgotten love child of the Carnage workshop. We started it a little while ago and we're waiting on a lot of parts, and so we just moved on to Trolbo, MX-5, Superman, cars like that. And yeah, it's been sitting here all forlorn up on the hoist. It is actually the only car in the Carnage workshop that's currently registered. So we should probably take advantage of that. So let's go put that 1UZ together, get it in the car, get it running, and enjoy the fruits of our labours. And here is our 1UZ. Now, it came out of a Toyota Sora Coupe that was given to us by one of Zane's mates. It's a good running engine and it's an early 1UZ, so it means it's got the heavy duty rods in it, unlike the later engines which have thinner rods and aren't as accepting to boost as this one is. So this one should make 500 horsepower at the tyres pretty easily with some boost. We've also got the heads reconditioned, they've got new springs and everything, they've got Kelford cams in them, so we'll get them onto this. We've also got to convert the engine to a front sump setup so it fits that V8 K-frame that we've installed in the car. We're going to use Castlemaine Rod Shop mounts to mount it in there, and Kian's already come down and visited us and cleaned up the engine bay nicely, so it's looking spick and span. But we do have to put an engine together, so let's go and do that. There's a lot of parts there on the bench. Let's get them on the engine. Okay. Some marks in the bores here that I'm not really a fan of. I don't think I've actually rotated this engine with the heads off it before. I think when we pulled the heads, we just pulled the heads and left it without rotating it. Just looked at the bores and thought, yeah, they look great. But that one, there's a little mark in that. There's definitely a mark in that. There's always something, isn't it? Fuck. Okay, so here's my theory on this. They use this as a bit of a paddock basher towards the end of its life, and they did say that overheated it a couple of times. I reckon they've cooked the rings, and the rings have transferred some material to the bores, and yeah, so I reckon not only will the rings be soft, so we'll have to replace them, but it probably could use a bit of a little hone, Scotty hone, just to clean up the bores a bit. So if we're going to do that, it means rods and pistons out, and if we're going to do that, might as well do rod bolts. So rod bolts, ring gaps, new rings, new rod bearings as a minimum. Might be able to get away with leaving the crank in there. Really don't want to upset the crank at this point because it is a 6-bolt crank and there's a lot going on down there. So if we can leave the crank in it and just hone it and then make sure everything's nice and clean, and then rods and pistons back in with rod bolts, ring gaps. Maybe that's something we could do. But to do that, I'm going to have to pull it apart. So, yeah, we're doing this again. Welcome to Scotty's Garage Rebuilds. Okay, so just been into the office, jumped on the computer, checked with our parts suppliers, and yes, I have rod bolts available, rod bearings available, the rings are on order, so they'll be a couple of days, but apparently the rod bolts are the same as LS rod bolts, funny enough. So that's nice and easy. But yeah, so I reckon, yeah, we'll whip these rods and pistons out. I'll have a look at the rings, but yeah, I reckon they'll be pretty rooted. Not really what I wanted to do today. I wanted to just like get into it, get it done, so we can get it in the car, make this happen. But yep, no, we are doing this again. Japanese do love a 12 mil. They're not a bad looking rod. I mean, remember there's the NA 2J rod, and that's the 1UZ rod. Certainly thicker in every part of it. So that is cool. Alrighty. Guess we need to do some cleaning, some honing, and get things ready for when our parts arrive so we can get it back together ASAP. Damn it. Right, well, the crank moves freely and smoothly, which is great. And all the rod journals look to be in really good condition, which is great. So I shouldn't have to do anything to it. Should be able to just slap some bearings in this thing. Got some standard bearings coming. We'll slap the bearings in, rods. I've got some standard rings coming. We'll gap them up. We'll hone the bores. But have a look at this bottom end. I mean, it is 6-bolt mains. So you've got 4 bolts going down and bolts going in the side through the block. When Toyota made these things, you know they were just like, yeah, they're not going to break. Not on our watch. So they over-engineered certainly their early ones, and certainly did a good job on them, because you make some good power with these things. If I had the budget, I'd probably put some rods and pistons in it, but we kind of don't at the moment. I don't really want to spend, you know, probably the best part of $3,000 once we do rods and pistons on top of everything else, which would be great, and we can get, you know, so much more horsepower out of it. But at some point you've got to draw the line, you know, and this is the line. Let's just do new bearings, new rings, gap the rings, and go for a nice moderate figure. I know it's not the Carnage way, but it's just the way we're going to have to go. This is the way. A little bit of oil in the bores, smear it round. So you got to sort of find your own rhythm, go in, as speed increases, go up and down, faster as your speed decreases, go slower. So yeah, but that has removed those marks from those bores, so that's pretty good. Got to be happy with that. some of that dual fisting action. Okay, for a fairly quick job, I am not unhappy with that at all. It's cleaned up probably 99% of the marks in the bores. Just one where it's a little bit heavy, and I'll tell you what, I'm not worried about that at all. It's looking pretty good. Certainly much happier now with it than I was when we first discovered the issue. So when we get our piston rings, we can gap them up, get them in. This thing will be sweet. So just looking over the bearings all look pretty good. Rods all look nice. I am noticing, so I've evened up obviously the ring gaps, but if you have a look at that ring gap there, the top ring gap looks closer than the bottom, and that seems to be on most of them, and I think that's a good, pretty clear indication that the top rings have gone a bit soft. See, they're closer together in that top ring. It means they're not as springy. They're not springing out as much, don't have as much tension on them because the gap is closed up, and I reckon that's a pretty clear indication that this thing's seen some heat in those top rings. Yeah, that one's bigger again. And yeah, you know, the boys freely admitted they did paddock bash the shit out of this thing and overheated it several times and put it away hot. So basically I reckon, and most of the marks were in the lower side of the piston bore where, you know, you stop the engine, it sits there, the piston's laying against the bore, the ring, which is probably smoking hot at that stage, is just laying against the bore, and it's just transferring the heat in the bore, and that's where the marks in the bore have got. And obviously the piston rings have got pretty hot and therefore gone a bit soft as well. So I think it's a good choice to put some new rings in it. Obviously we've honed it already, and I think we'll end up with a much better engine out of this than if I'd just slapped the heads on it as it was, because it could have been every chance that we put the heads on it, you know, seal it up, throw some boost into it, and it just starts blowing by the rings, which no one wants. So anyway, all right, now we're just waiting on some parts. So it's a couple of days later and we've got our rod bearings, we've got our rod bolts, and we have some piston rings as well. So we're going to do our ring gaps. Interesting thing with these rod bolts are they are actually for LS1. True story. So your standard sort of LS1 rod bolts also fit 1UZ. So I've already just lightly screwed them into these rods, and they just peek out the bottom because they are slightly longer. I don't think that's going to cause us any dramas at all. Just give you a quick comparison. Smaller head, but slightly longer bolt. And yeah, obviously stronger bolt being ARP, you know, 180 PSI yield strength. So they are not ARP 2000s, they're just standard ARPs, but they should do well for us and better than the standard Toyota bolts, which I'm sure are just fine, but why not use ARP when you have the chance? Right, so new bearings, new rod bolts, and new rings, and we'll gap them to something boost friendly. All right, let's have a look at the rings. So when you open your packet of rings, you'll have 3 packets inside. So top ring, second ring, oil rings. Now when you're looking for the top of the ring, if they have no mark, then they can go either way. If it says top on them, like our second rings do, then obviously you want to have top to the top. When you're buying rings for a 1UZ, make sure you get the right rings, because the early engines have 1.5 mil, as it says on the box. Later ones are 1.3 mil, and they're kind of hard to come by. So just make sure you know what you've got when you're ordering parts. Not even going to have to file these. They are bigger than the minimum. So I've got that set to 18 thou, and they're already bigger than that. So let's see what they actually are. 20. 24. 24 thou. It's on the large side. Let's throw a couple more in. Yep, pretty much. $24 thou. So now I've got to make a decision on whether I accept that, given that I wanted 18 as a minimum. 6 thou larger is quite a difference. Problem being is, I'm pretty sure these rings were the only ones available. Unless I go for a different supplier. I guess I'll have a look. So I have jumped online, had a bit of a look, and there's not much available here in Australia. However, I did find a new set of NPC rings overseas and the price was right, so I am getting them sent here and they'll be here in about a week. A few people said, just go with it, just send it. I'm like, but I just checked them again. They're actually 25 thou. 25 thou ring gap on a bore of 3.44 inch is too much. Like if it was a full race engine where we're sending all the boost, if we were pumping like 30, 40 pounds of boost in that, maybe I'd go with that because you're going to get some ring expansion, it'll close up those gaps. But this is going to be, you know, a street / turbo motor, probably not going to see more than 15 pounds boost. Based off that, I would go with a ring gap of about 18 thou. So 25, it's like 7 thou larger. That's a lot. That's a lot. And just to back up my theory, I pulled the standard rings out of one of the pistons and put it in the bore, measured it up, 13 thou. So these rings are nearly double the gap of the ring that came out of the motor. So 13 thou is too tight in my mind for boost, and it would probably eat a ringland if you boosted it too hard. But you know, we're not going to do 13 thou. So yeah, we're going to replace the rings, gap them properly, set it up properly so it doesn't, you know, blow all its oil and fuel past the rings constantly, because that's the problem. You know, you end up with blow by, you end up blowing oil out of the breathers, you end up with E85 contamination. You already get E85 contamination, but you end up with more E85 contamination through the bigger ring gaps and that sort of thing. And this is the second time this has happened to me with this brand of rings, so I'm a little bit disappointed. We had the same issue with the 2JZ. I ended up going and buying some Japanese rings and they worked mint. So we're going to do that again, gap this thing up properly and come out of it with a much better engine than if I just sent it like this. If this was just an engine that I'm like, yeah, we're just slapping together, it'll be fine, sure. But don't expect big things out of it. We're going to do it right and come out with a much better engine. Talking about engine stuff, there's also something else I want to talk about, and it's over there. So besides our ring problem, Another thing that's been worrying me of late is how we're going to do the Serpentine belt on the 1UZ, because the 1UZ in the Sora has some very specific features, namely this hydraulic pump which mounts to the front of the engine and runs the thermofan. That's right, the thermofan is run by hydraulic oil pressure, not electricity, which is one of those crazy Toyota things that Toyota sometimes does. I'm sure it made sense to someone, but it just complicates the issue. So you could remove the gears out of this, but most of the time when people do that, they damage this pulley, you know, because it is pressed on. So you've got to try and grind things to get at the bolts or knock it off somehow, and they usually damage it in the process. So it does complicate doing this without running a hydraulic fan. But then I did find this solution. It's made by Gates, and apparently it's off the 3UZ in a Land Cruiser. I believe that's the case, but don't quote me on it. But yeah, it's Gates, it's good quality, and it's just, there's no pump there. It's just a freewheeling pulley, basically, on a mount, and it's the same pattern and everything. So yeah, that will solve our issue when it comes to the Serpentine belt, which is great. It did cost a few bucks, but I think it's worth it. Anyway, yeah, we've got some ring gaps to do. The rings won't be here for another week or so, which means you're going to see the engine build on a future episode of Carnage.